Hello and welcome to On the Cube Leadership Podcast. Well, leaders are challenged with the courts right now. That's right. Like all we're hearing is leadership and courts, right? Whether it be Donald Trump, facing court, whether it be the Supreme Court talking about universities and Harvard and their admissions, their affirmative action, admission structure and all that sort of stuff. We're talking about the Supreme Court and how they've ruled in favor to protect businesses, and there's even the courts of the the Southern Baptist convention that they got together and made a vote as well. So there's so much happening in the world right now to do with leadership and the courts that we thought, well, why not just do a theme where we're going to talk about today about all the challenges that we can face. And look, as we do always, we just look at things that are happening in the news and we don't delve too deep into them because we're not experienced and we don't know all the details of those areas. However, what we do, yes, I said do live on YouTube. What we can do is we can look at these things and learn from them as metaphors of how we can be better leaders. Just learning from what we would do in those situations, what we can interpret from those situations, remembering we don't know all the information, but we can definitely learn from. So if you're up for learning from some of the things that are happening with leaders, especially to do with courts, in the current news climate, then stick with us and we are going to share. I say we because it's not just me. We're also joined by Dr. Rod St. Hill, the business pastor. Dr. Rod, welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Craig, and it's great to be with you again. I'm really looking forward to our chat today.
Awesome. Yeah, there's a few of these topics that I'm really looking forward to delving into. Look, obviously you've got an incredible experience. You've got you're just an incredibly wise man. I absolutely love having our chats about this, but you've obviously been we'll get into a little bit later, but you've been heavily involved in universities and academia, from a career standpoint, from an administrative standpoint. So I'm interested to get your take on those. Also, there's a couple of these topics that we're going to delve quite deep into. So, ladies and gentlemen, buckle up, strap yourself in. Let's get straight into it. Well, let's talk about one of the biggest news stories that's happening with leadership and the courts is Donald Trump being sued for everything, right? So without getting into the politics of it or anything like that, there was some news that leaked, over the last week or so, that was a tape of his that he was boasting to people, and all links are down below of these articles or links to YouTube videos that we're referring to, whatever, where there were some recordings leaked of him boasting about some of the things that were happening with the wars and all that sort of stuff, and him supposedly referring to classified papers that he jokes about, oh, that should have been classified, but it wasn't, or whatever. Like, there's all this stuff. Now, Dr. Rod, this is when we saw these tapes come out, it was very interesting that there was all that, like, especially all the right wing side of things that we tend to watch on YouTube, all the right wing commentators, everything like that. So these tapes are fake and everything like that. Like there was all this uproar, like, are they real? Are they fake? Are they whatever? The one thing that I actually got from this was quite interesting and felt that we could discuss is it's interesting that whether these tapes are true or not, if they're real, are these tapes real or not? I think for the lesson that I learned from it is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether they're real or not. What it actually matters is the perception. right? And what I got from this is everyone talking about, well, these are fake or whatever, but because of Trump's track record, because of his unfiltered way of communicating and the way that he does things, even if these tapes were fake, it just is so in line with his character or the history of the things that he's done that I kind of felt, well, I wouldn't be surprised if he did. And I think that this is a lesson that we as leaders should learn is sometimes it's not necessarily whether we do a thing or not. Like we were actually talking about last week about perceived what was it that we were talking about last week, Dr. Rod?
There was conflicts of interest, Craig.
Conflict of interest. That's right. We're talking about perceived and actual and everything like that. That the perception is sometimes not as is just as bad as the actual. And the perception, we as leaders need to be very careful of what we perceived of doing, and that's in line with our character and our history and the evidence of things we've done in the past. What's your take on this tape situation?
Well, without going into any sort of discussion about whether or not it's fake, I think one leadership lesson is very clear. Don't assume that everybody in the room at any particular time is on your side.
That's true. Now, what's actually really interesting is apparently the people that were recording this were reporters. And
publishers, I think there were.
Yeah.
I think there was a publisher's representative in the room as well. So, my understanding is that they were interviewing Donald Trump as part of the overall preparation for the writing of a book.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Journalists, writers, journalists.
Well, writers.
So they're obviously recording, and I wouldn't be surprised if he knew that they were recording. I mean, he actually turned around at one stage and said, "Oh, and this is off the record," and then kept talking. I don't know. I see that in movies. Like, oh no, this is off the record, and by law they're not allowed to put it in or whatever. But I don't know. I don't trust that. If you're going to say this is off the record, you shouldn't be talking about it.
Nothing's off the record. It's really just, I guess, a moral plea.
Yeah.
That if I'm going to level with you, this is stuff that shouldn't get out in the public arena. But a leader should never, ever assume that anything they say, anything they write won't be used against them at some time in the future.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, you can't assume that everybody in the room is on your side.
Yeah, that's really good. Don't assume everyone's. Well, I'd take that one step further. Just assume that everyone in the room is against you. Is that a bad thing?
Look, I don't think I'd be quite as cynical as all that. But I think if you make the assumption that not everyone is on your side, that really goads you into using a good deal of wisdom.
Yeah.
And look, I would have to say my impression from afar, because I've never been with Donald Trump, is that sometimes he could use a little bit more wisdom than he does. He can be a little bit thoughtless at times and perhaps not necessarily looking a long way in the future. Some people will use the expression, how does my comment or how does my behavior age? And if the answer is, well, it might not age all that well, then perhaps you shouldn't do it in the first place.
That's good. How does my comment age? That's really good. Does it age like a fine wine or a scotch or whiskey, or does it age like some old fish?
Look, my wife made a comment just yesterday. We were sitting with a senior pastor from one of the larger churches here on the Gold Coast, and we were talking about this very thing. And she said, well, we actually watch a lot of old movies. One reason for that is you can get them for free, but we watch a lot of old movies. And you look at the dialogues in some of those movies and attitudes that are portrayed. Well, you probably wouldn't get away with that in any production today. So it's a good question to ask. Looking forward, how will my comments or how will my behaviours age?
I think, going back to your statement of don't assume that everyone is going to be for you. I must admit that I have a weakness, a weakness, a fault, or what, I don't know what you would claim it to be, but I do have a tendency. I can get over familiar, like over comfortable with some people that you think that they're ride or die. You think you're best friends and everything like that, and you just get comfortable. I know there's times that I've just gotten super comfortable with people that, a year or two later, you've said something and they've gotten offended because you got too comfortable with them. And so, yeah, how do we draw that line? How do we draw that line because it's quite commonly spoken about, be friendly but not familiar. That kind of
Yes, look,
statement.
I think that as leaders, our objective shouldn't be to make friends. Now, I know that doesn't sound too good, but I was reading an article by another pastor actually yesterday, looking at the difference between leading and entertaining. And if you see yourself as a leader, but your main objective is to have as many people following you as possible, then you're probably not a leader. You're probably an entertainer. And I think the same thing applies to friendship. Building friendships and leading are just not the same thing.
That's good.
You look at the life of Jesus, he really only had a very few close, intimate friendships. And he actually said to them, I call you friends.
Yeah.
Now, there weren't many, just a small core of people whom he called friends. But yet, of course, he led, during his lifetime on earth, tens of thousands of people. But he wasn't friendly, or he wasn't a friend of all of those people. So if I can say to leaders, listen, your primary role, it isn't about creating friendships. It's about building influence and empowering people in turn to exercise leadership to one degree or another. We all need friends. We all need friends. You and I both know that. We've been on the planet long enough to realize we cannot do life on our own. We need Jesus. We need that relationship with God through Jesus. And we also need some close, intimate friends who love us enough to tell us the truth and to keep us on the right track. But I would say if you're a leader who tries to lead by building friendships, then actually you're not a leader at all.
Yeah. There's a theory that we talk about in our leadership development program, free leadership development program. Yes, shameless plug. Link is in the description. Go and check it out. But we speak about that in our program, where we talk about it's important for you as a leader to categorize the people that are around you, right? And communicate to each of them in an according way. Like, so for example, the first tier is just, there's always a lot of spectators around you, and this is taken directly from Jesus. I won't go too deep into it because we do it in the program. But Jesus had a lot of spectators. There were a lot of spectators that followed him around. Then he spoke to them in parables and just sort of that was it. Like, and why did he speak to them like that? Because he says those who have eyes to see, they see. If they have ears to hear, they hear. But just sort of saying that this is just going to go over the head of people, so I'm not even going to bother, right? And I'm just going to talk in parables to them. Then you have the society, right? And the society is the people that they're kind of bought in, which was kind of like Jesus' disciples, which people, not the 12, the 400 odd that were following him around, right? They were all bought in, and he would turn around and he would interpret the the parables to them. So he'd teach them a bit. He'd just tell stories to the spectators, to the society. He would teach them, and then you have your select, getting down to your select few, where Jesus had Peter, James, and John. That was it, right? Peter, James, and John, they were the ones who went with him everywhere. They were the ones that he always took away to pray with him and saw him in vulnerable times and everything like that. So we've got I skip. There's a couple of other steps in there, but for time's sake, I'll skip that. But we've got to make sure that we have those people, and we know that we communicate with them differently to what we do with the other people around us. So just make sure that's probably the important thing to take away from this. Make sure when you're communicating, you categorize those people. Where are these people, and how should I communicate to them differently? I don't mean like talk down to people or ignore people or anything like that. It's just, you just don't give as much personal information or as much information to certain people, just because they won't be as bought in as possible. Now, the other part of that, Dr. Rod, was just the fact that when they're talking about it being, fake, it being that they were saying like it was a deep fake or whatever of the recording or whatever. The fact that he has a history of talking like this and everything, it just made it so much harder to, even if it was fake, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, maybe it's fake, but I still believe that he did it or something like it. How do we as leaders make sure that when accusations come against us and things like that, that our past, our history will actually speak for itself?
Well, we have to apply wisdom every time we open our mouths, I think, and that's a difficult thing, because often, we're thrust into a situation where we don't have time to prepare.
Mm-hmm.
Not like this podcast where we have at least 24 hours to look at all the background references and to sit down and think about how our conversation may go. Obviously, we don't script it, but one of the things that exercises my mind a lot is the need to speak wisely, partly because obviously we're trying to inform leaders how they can become better leaders, but also because I don't want this podcast to die because we get banned, or worse, somebody sues us. So I want to speak truth. I want to encourage leaders to become better leaders, but I also don't want to restrict the effectiveness of this podcast by saying something which could actually end up being used to shoot it down. That's not to say I'm frightened of dissent or disagreement or anything like that, by no means. But I do think I need to apply wisdom in what I say, because I don't want to undermine the purpose for which this whole podcast exists. And I think we need to take that attitude into every area of leadership. Just as a bit of an aside, I was thinking, well, if I was advising Donald Trump on how to approach the court case over all this, maybe what I should say is, well, you guys all know I'm a buffoon. I didn't mean any of that. Come on, guys. Everybody knows I'm a buffhead. I wasn't trying to undermine national security. I don't know how that would go in court. I really don't. But anyway, and I'm not a lawyer either, which is probably just as well.
and it probably wouldn't help his 2024
probably not. No, elect me. You need a buffhead.
Well, I'm just an idiot, so
you need a
don't
buffhead
listen
as
to me.
a president after the one we've had for the last 4 years. I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah. Look, it's I just kind of like, I want to implore leaders to just be aware that your past, your history is going to be what you're judged by. Now, not talking about going into heaven and what Jesus judges you by. We know that if you've accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, we know that he's judged by that. But as leaders, I know that it clearly states in the Bible that we will be held account for what we actually do as leaders as well. But not just that. And obviously that's not going to determine our entry into heaven. It's just we're probably going to get a bad rap on the knuckles or something from Jesus for not stewarding the people we've been given to lead. But that aside, that's a whole another conversation. But the world will judge you if something comes up. And now, now in this world of deep fakes, that AI is just getting better and better, and we will just see more and more deep fakes come about, and they'll be better and better, and it'll be so much harder for people to see what is real and what isn't. The best way for people to know and be able to judge what you've done is by your history. So what does your history say about you? What does your past say about you? What are your true everyday actions? I don't mean just, when you put on the spotlight and just like, hey, this is what I'm performing. I'm not talking about those moments. I mean, no, like your day to day. What's your character revealing in your everyday actions that people can set as a standard of seeing something and going, no, that's not him or that's not her. I know what she's really like. I know what he's really like. So make sure your actions every day are revealing your true character so that it will be the thing that stands up as evidence against any accusations against you. Talking about leadership and courts. Well, the Supreme Court, which is the highest of all courts, apparently. No, is there one higher than that, Dr. Rod?
No, not in the United States. No.
Supreme Court, the High Court, and then the Supreme Court. Is it? I don't know. Like, what's the difference between a High Court and a Supreme Court?
Oh, there are different levels of courts, but you can't. In the United States, once you've been to the Supreme Court, you've exhausted all avenues for any kind of appeal.
So, I'm really interested to talk to you, Dr. Rod, about this, about Harvard and their affirmative action admissions process and their fight that's been going on for like almost 10 years or something like that. Yourself, you've been in administration in universities. You've been a CEO of a higher education institution. You've been vice principal. Like you've covered the gamut of the higher education, academia world. Harvard now have been told, that they can't hire based on race, and their principal, or hold on, let me forget who it was. Don't know, the President-elect Claudine Gay, that's who it is, responded. And she went on about and was just talking about, well, even though the Supreme Court says that we can't hire for race, we're still going to do it. Yeah, I reading between the lines, it pretty much just said that, which I thought was pretty interesting. So they've been on this battle for a while. Obviously, there's been a lot of affirmative action, everything like that. I'm really interested to take and I want to just say it from the outset that we are two straight white males now going to be talking about affirmative action and things like that. So I just want to say that, but we have wisdom and we have discernment. And so, Dr. Rob, this affirmative administration stuff, first of all, as an academic that's been in administration in universities, you were dean of students at a university.
I have been, yes, I have been.
Your
yes,
role?
yeah.
What's your take on this affirmative admissions process?
Well, look, there is a place for affirmative action. I'd have to say that based on experience. Look, the whole debate, of course, has become very strongly focused on race in the United States, and critical race theory, of course, is brought to the fore. The idea that there's widespread institutional barriers to people who are not white and often male. Look, as an outside observer, I would have to say I can't get excited about critical race theory. It might have explained some things in history, but it certainly really isn't descriptive of the way the United States or any other Western nation is at the moment. So I just put that on the table. I don't accept critical race theory because I think it takes us in the wrong direction altogether. However, if you go back, say 20, 25 years in terms of the history of affirmative action, in terms of admission of students, this is about admission of students, not hiring, but it's about admission of students into courses at university level. Initially, affirmative action was not really any kind of recognition or outcome of racism. It was recognized that there were some people who had a disadvantaged background, because the research showed, for example, that it was generally people who came from higher income backgrounds who succeeded in admission and therefore in graduation from university, and so they got the jobs that required university degrees.
And it just perpetuated the problem.
My reading of the history, my understanding of the history, and having been involved myself in administering affirmative action of various kinds in relation to students, is that race, or in some cases coming from a rural area, was really used as a shorthand way of dealing with a whole range of factors that led to some kind of disadvantage. Poverty, living in a remote area, lack of access to high quality education during the schooling years, a whole range of factors, broken families, all of these things impinged upon a young person's performance, their academic performance during their school years. And of course, when entry into university is determined only on the basis of academic results, some people who would otherwise perform well but have disadvantage don't get an opportunity to demonstrate their capacity to perform well. Now, I'm a great believer in the value of outputs rather than inputs. And therefore, where there is evidence that people who have missed out in some way, I think that there needs to be an alternative way for them into university. And here in Australia, we usually actually call it university entry not university, alternative entry requirements. And I've written lots and lots of statements about degrees. I've done lots and lots of submission on new degrees in my career, and we always specify alternative entry requirements. Most of the universities here in Australia have special pathways for people who have disadvantage. I think what's happened in more recent years is that using race as an indicator has kind of lost its focus, and the focus has come back to be purely on race. Now, in terms of the Supreme Court's decision, I know it's come under a lot of criticism. The president was very critical in a dangerous way, I think, because I think what he said undermines the authority of the court. The decision wasn't unanimous. It was a split decision in both cases in respect of Harvard, and I think the other university was North Carolina. So it was a split decision. Not all of the judges agreed, but the judgment was about the Constitution, and that is what the Supreme Court should be should be focusing on. I think some of the reactions have been quite unhelpful on both the right and the left, because I think they misunderstand the whole purpose for affirmative action in the first place. It wasn't really a response to racism. It was a response to disadvantage, and race was used, if you like, as a shorthand way of indicating disadvantage. It's probably, look, I would say now we need to be a lot more sophisticated. And one of the things that has been asserted is that race-based affirmative action has actually left racial minorities out of the system altogether. So I think it's probably time the universities use far more sophisticated methods for admission into entry. But look, I really think for the good of the nation, I'm talking here about their economic good, we need to focus on the quality of the output, not the quality of the input. Personally, I'm very keen on the idea of open entry into universities, which means anybody can go.
Yeah.
They won't all get into the university of their first choice, of course, but I think open entry is quite a good idea, but with a fairly rigorous weeding out along the way, so that we're saying, well, okay, here's your opportunity, but you've got to perform well, say by about a third to halfway through your degree.
Yeah. So that's because it's all well and good to give someone your access, but they still need to be able to perform. Because the thing is the way that I see it is, look, I didn't do well at school. Sorry, I actually did reasonably well at school. However, I had a lot of learning disabilities, which challenged me, but I still did reasonably well. I actually got into university because I was a mature age student and I sat a special test, and that test suited my ability and I got a really high score in that rather than all of the other class stuff and everything like that. So I suppose I got a special admission into university. I would say that. I suffered at university because I wasn't prepared. I kind of got in through not really a loophole, but like I got through an easier route because I was a mature age student, because I was over 21. I then just sat a test that I scored really well in because my intelligence was good, not because my study was good or anything like that. So I got into university. I had zero study skills. I had really bad study habits. I was not able to write assignments. I was not able to, I really, for the first 6 months or first semester to the first year, I struggled. I got a lot of like ones and twos out of 7 we score in Australia. I got a lot of ones and twos. I got good grades in some as well, but all the challenging subjects really low because I wasn't ready. I hadn't developed the skills, so I couldn't get in. So my question to you there is, it was great that I had an opportunity because I wouldn't have gotten it otherwise, because of my disabilities or whatever it may be. So, okay, so I was disadvantaged, but I also wasn't prepared. And so how do you balance that by, well, we'll just let these people in because they're disadvantaged? How do we make sure, because it's kind of unfair on them that we're then lumping them in to this high performance, high pressure situation? How do we make sure that they can handle that if we're just setting the bar lower for them?
Well, look, I think one of the responsibilities of the university is to actually provide assistance. And I don't know what the situation is like in the United States, but here in Australia, the universities do provide a lot of assistance. But of course, it's up to the student to take advantage of the assistance which is made available. My observation, this will sound harsh, there's easily 30% of students in universities here in this country, in Australia, they shouldn't be there. They're just not wired for university work. I think it's a terrible tragedy, actually, that we're really making people think they must go to university. No, they mustn't.
That's good.
There's no must about it.
Yeah.
Here in Australia, we've got a shortage of people in the trades. Now, if we're convincing everybody that doing anything other than going to university after you leave school is a bad thing, of course, people are not going to be attracted to go into the trades. And so we've got a shortage of people in the trades. We tell everybody that university graduates are going to make more income over their lifetime than those who don't have a university degree.
But that's not true.
And look, it's becoming less and less true, that's for sure, as more and more people graduate. As a higher proportion of the population have university degrees. The university degree just becomes a gateway. You've got to wave that degree in front of somebody before you can get a job. but it doesn't necessarily help you in that job. And the worry that if you don't have a university degree, you won't earn a high income, it's just an absolute, I think it's a lie, because you don't have to live by the averages. And I know for sure and certain that somebody who goes into the trades, as long as they don't drink their income away, they can actually build a very significant wealth portfolio.
Or buy too many jet skis with their...
Absolutely. Well, they can be off the tools by the time they're 40.
Yeah.
And if you don't believe it, someone come and talk to me about it.
It's
possible.
I'm a bit of an advocate for this, because I used to, when I first started business coaching, I specialized with
yes, you did.
That's
right. That's right. Absolutely.
And so working with them, helping them actually be smarter with their businesses, and it was such a reward, because look, trust me, trades can make really good money, have a really good business, and so sorry, I digress.
So look, one issue, there are too many people in universities. It's not politically correct to say that. There's no doubt that is the case. The second thing is, some people do enter university without appropriate study skills. I was one of them. I succeeded in high school. I was very successful academically in high school, but I found it very difficult to adjust the way I thought and wrote when I entered university, and I did quite poorly. I think I only failed one subject. Back in those days, subjects were year long, by the way, so I failed one of my subjects in the mid-year exams, and I really only just scraped through in many others. And it took me a long time to figure out that learning at university level was really quite different, because it required a different way of thinking. It required a more mature way of thinking, a deeper learning. To put it, I guess, in simple terms, it was to make the transition from learning what to understanding why.
Yes.
And I struggled. I really struggled with that transition. And I did get some help. I did go along to the learning and teaching seminars and so on. I learned all sorts of study techniques and so on. And eventually it did click, and I ended up graduating with a first-class honours degree. But I didn't start out so well. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so strongly committed to the idea that it's the end that matters, not so much the beginning. And frankly, I'd like to see pretty much open entry into universities, but on the understanding that there will be quite a severe culling process. Now, also culturally, and this is an issue of leadership for people who are in the university system, culturally, I think we've got to get away from the idea that if you fail, that you're a failure. No, and I used to say this to my students: you're not a failure. You've discovered that this isn't for you.
Yes.
So, when I was a business academic, sorry to talk over you, but when I was a business academic, I occasionally I'd come across a student who was lousy at business. And I would say, well, okay, you've discovered that business isn't for you. This is not your calling. Have a think. Let's see if we can work out what your calling might be. And so I had students who shifted, for example, into education or into one of the social sciences, other social sciences areas, and they succeeded. So sometimes, we've got to allow people to fail without labeling them as failures, but rather they've actually discovered that something just isn't for them. Rock climbing isn't for me. I tried and I failed. I don't see myself as a failure.
Isn't that the purpose of our youth anyway? We're meant to be discovering things and trying to figure out what we're good at, what we're not. Like, if I've been through a lot of different careers and a lot of different things. Every single one of them has added to my experience, has enabled me, has kind of, if you look back on it, it's a beautiful patchwork of preparing me for what I do now. But I'd do one thing, I'd succeed at it and move on because I was bored, or I'd fail at it and take my lessons and move on. And I think that's actually a very, very good lesson is the fact that, just because we fail at something doesn't mean that we're a failure. I love it. Because we should be discovering what is our purpose. I mean, not everyone's purpose is university. Not everyone's purpose is the same thing. This is the core of what we teach around it. Everyone, in the Bible, it talks about, Paul writes about with one body, many parts. The ear can't wish that it was a nose, otherwise the body wouldn't be able to hear. So we all have a different part to play. We can't all play that exact same part as everyone else. So we don't have to be sheep and follow everything. If something doesn't work for us, that's okay. It was a learning. It was a lesson, not a loss, and we can learn from it and move on. It was a failure. We failed at it, but we're not a failure. I think that's really good. But also, Dr. Rod, just want to kind of look at this from, actually, before, if you guys want any, if you're wondering about what's this affirmative action administration thing, I've put a link below to a Wall Street Journal video that I thought was actually quite well put down that really explained the whole affirmative action admissions kind of process and the different takes on everything like that. I thought it was actually a quite informative video, which was really good. Now, there's so much that you just said, Dr. Rod, that I want to kind of jump on, because you even shifted my thoughts on this, because I'm very much believing. Okay, I'm going to step back for a moment. You're probably thinking you may have let me get my thoughts. You mentioned that we're talking about university, and you probably think, I don't go to university, I don't want to go to university, I don't run a university, whatever. Okay, so let's talk about our businesses and the way that we run our businesses, or whatever organization we lead. We're going to be pressured with this affirmative action stuff, right? And we have to, and like you said, there is an advantage to it and there's a disadvantage to it, and there's there's different approaches. So I want to talk about the way that this is approached, but I want everyone to kind of consider also in the back of their mind, this isn't about university admissions. This is how you're running your business, how you're running your teams, how are you leading in life. My initial reaction was, because in the Wall Street Journal video, they were actually talking about that someone sued because they had better scores. They didn't have good enough scores to get into the university in the main section, but if they compared themselves with the other people that were the affirmative action recruits, they did better than them. So they sued and they got into university and everything like that, because there's discrimination, all that sort of stuff. So the Wall Street Journal video talks about this. It's really good. And that was I must admit, that was my original take on it. I'm like, yeah, of course. Like it should just be whoever performs the best should get in. Like that's it. Cut and dry. No one should look at race, at color, or whatever. It's here's the results. However, in this video, they do actually talk about the comparison between California that changed their affirmative action, that removed affirmative action 10 years ago or 20 years ago, whatever it was that they said. And they're seeing that there's actually a massive decrease in minorities and all that sort of stuff. And this is actually one of the graphs that they show about the difference between before affirmative action and afterwards, and the representation of minorities and stuff like that. Go and watch the video. Go and watch the video. So my take was originally, it should just be on performance and that's it. However, what you mentioned was there's some people that are disadvantaged, everything. And I thought to myself, when I was at university, there were affirmative action admissions for Aboriginals, right? Like they, it was always spoken about that they could just get into university, everything like that. But at university, I kind of never cared that they were there because I didn't feel like I was missing out because they were there. I'm like, good on them, whatever. Like it just didn't bother me. However, when you started speaking about it earlier, it did kind of, my mind started going, oh, maybe there is an advantage to it. Maybe there is a place for it. It shouldn't just be performance. We should set aside like 5%, 10%, whatever for disadvantaged people. And I'm not missing out because of that 10%, because that 10% is set aside anyway. So it's only out of 90% that I've got an opportunity for anyway. It's not, that is permanently set aside. So I do kind of get that. And being someone who has learning disabilities and took it, like you mentioned before about the universities have all the, the opportunities for people with challenges, and I took advantage of probably took too much advantage of some of them, to be honest. I feel like you've kind of changed my mind a little bit on this, but how can we as leaders make sure that we are being fair, giving opportunity to people of lesser opportunity and not lesser people, but like people that are disadvantaged? How do we as leaders make sure that we are still performing? Like we've got our organizations, our teams, everything. We have to perform best, right? We need the best team and everything like that. And sometimes affirmative hires are not quite the best, but it's, the best of the other bunch or whatever. But how do we balance that as leaders?
Yeah, look, I think we've got to be very careful about, if you like, carrying this particular Supreme Court decision into the environment of individual businesses.
Mm-hmm.
If we're running a business, we need to ensure that that business is sustainable. And by that, I mean that the business will still be here 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now. So it is very important that you hire the best person for whatever position you have. However, and I don't think this works in very small businesses. So you need, I think, probably, look, it's an arbitrary figure, but you probably need to have at least 50 employees for this to work. But once you get to a reasonable size where you have, say, around maybe somewhere between 40 and 50 employees, then I do think you're able to have a couple of experimental positions in your business.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, if people fail in those positions, or those positions fail in terms of the structure of your organization, they're not going to pull it down. This can't work in a very small business. But in a larger business, I think you are able to do some experimentation and bring people in who may not have the right qualifications or experience or even personal attributes. So they wouldn't be the, if you like, the normal hires, and then invest in them. I think this is a Christian thing to do. Now, I'm not an advocate of DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion.
Yes.
I don't believe in these externally administered, or these things being forced on businesses. It should never be legislated. I don't even think it should be something that the peak bodies advocate or impose on their members. I'm assuming that many of the people that we're speaking to are Christians, and they have a desire to lead in a Christian way. If they own or have a senior management role in a business, they want to be business owners or business managers in a Christian way. What I'm suggesting is that the Christian way is to allow for a few positions in your business, in a sense, to be experimental. and to appoint people into those positions who may in fact be otherwise unemployable, or who in the normal course of events may not have an opportunity to embark, say, on a management track within a business. And I think we need to have a kind of contract as well, where it's made quite clear that this is the nature of the position and what we're trying to achieve with it. Again, the emphasis, I think, should be on what the outcome is, not on what the input is. As I say, this is not going to work for small businesses because the risk that it goes wrong has very significant implications for the business. Your primary responsibility as a business manager or as an owner is to ensure that that business actually survives and continues to contribute positively to human flourishing by placing good products on the market and offering good jobs for people. So I hope I'm not misunderstood. I definitely don't support DEI. We shouldn't be imposing these things. But if you're in business, I think you should give serious consideration to the suggestion that I've made.
That's great. Talking about small businesses, I think this is a perfect transition we're talking about Supreme Court. Supreme Court made another decision that affects small businesses. Yeah, Supreme Court were busy this week. There was actually a couple of other big things that happened in the Supreme Court, but I kind of limited to these. Maybe we'll get into them in future weeks. But the Supreme Court rules in favor of web design. So this is an article from NPR. Links all in the description if you want to check it out. Supreme Court rules in favor of web designer who refuse to work for same-sex weddings. So what pretty much happened is there was a Colorado web designer that was approached to create a website promoting gay weddings, and they refused because it was against their values, and then they were sued over it. Now, it obviously made its way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court overruled it and said a web designer has a freedom, and I think it came down to some artistic, thing that some artistic clause or something like that, because they're a web designer. But they ruled in favor of the web designer and said, no, if the web designer doesn't want to create it, that they don't have to. Dr. Rod, now, luckily this was around web design. We obviously, a few years back, was this bakery that was in trouble because they refused to do a wedding cake for a gay couple and stuff like that. So there is a risk for business owners, Christian business owners. There's a risk for us that if we're asked to do something that is outside of our values, there's a risk for us being sued. Now, the lucky thing is this was web designer, so it fell within some artistic clause or something like that. However, what if it was something else? How should we as Christians, because obviously this Supreme Court ruled in favor of us and we're like, yay, I'm like, no, we should be warned that more of this stuff is coming, but how do we stand up against this stuff?
Well, standing up against it is pretty tough because you could lose your business. I think this has to be an individual decision and it needs to be prayerfully made. Mm-hmm. There are a couple of comments though that I think are worth making. A number of cases like this have actually succeeded in the courts in the United States. And the basic ruling is that people have religious freedom. They have freedom of thought and freedom of religion. Philosophically, if we don't have freedom of thought and freedom of religion, we really do not have a civil society.
Yep.
And I think that's fundamentally important to understand. Civil society depends upon us having freedom of thought and freedom of religious expression. That's a philosophical point. From a practical perspective, any kind of economic transaction that we enter into has two parties who effectively have a contract. On one side of the contract is somebody who's making an offer to sell, and on the other side of the contract is somebody who's making an offer to buy. Both parties must have the freedom to say, I'm not going to pursue this contract. Otherwise, the economic system falls apart.
Yeah, like, I mean, here's the thing. Like, on that, like, we should have the freedom to say no. Now,
Exactly.
I've worked with gay people before. I've got no problems with them. I've had good friends and everything. I don't agree with what they do, but our business dealings wasn't promoting their values, wasn't like there wasn't anything that was out of alignment with my values in the business dealing that we had. Now, that being said, I've refused to do business with Christians before just because I didn't feel comfortable doing business with them, right? And so we, like, I'm trying to kind of just remove the religious part of it out of it. Is like, me as a business owner, I should have the right to refuse to do business with someone that I just don't feel comfortable doing business with, whether they're Christian or not. That at the core of it, I should be. Now, you're saying, with you saying, like, we have the right to do that, who says we have the right? Where is that law? Is that, like, where's that protected? Are we actually protected for that? Or is that just your opinion? Is that just an economic theory? Like, where is that, kind of founded?
Well, it differs in different countries.
Yeah.
Here in Australia, of course, there's never been legislative protection of freedom of religion. And Australia has never signed up to the United Nations Declaration or anything like that. So freedom of religion in Australia is a fairly tenuous thing and always has been from a legal perspective. It's very different in the United States, where there appears, at any rate, to be constitutional protection for freedom of thought and freedom of religion. And of course, it's been proscribed by some courts and by legislation and so on. But it does seem to me that there are more and more cases being won in favour of the right of individuals to exercise their decisions based on their religious beliefs. And I think that's really, really important. So, as I say, there's the philosophical notion that each of us must be free to think and to act on the basis of our religious beliefs. And on the other hand, our economic system actually depends upon the two parties to any contract being able to say no to the contract.
Yeah. So
in other words,
but on that point, like, that's what I'm saying. Like, you just said, like, it depends on two parties being able to say no to a contract, to agree or disagree on a contract.
Oh, but we're not talking about a formal contract. There's an implicit contract.
No, yeah, exactly.
Right?
But, like, where
sometimes
is that
there's a formal contract, say business to business transactions. But look, when I go to a supermarket to buy my toothpaste, implicitly there's a toothpaste manufacturer who's making me an offer.
Yeah.
You hand over a certain amount of money and I'll let you have my toothpaste. All right?
Yeah.
Theologically, what's happening is, when I take that tube of toothpaste, I'm diminishing somebody, and that's why I pay money for it, because I repair that diminution of that person. But you see, the toothpaste maker should have the option of saying, no, I don't want to sell to you. You're too tall. I don't sell to tall people. Well, good on them. I can go and buy toothpaste from somebody else. Now, the only time that it becomes a real issue, of course, is when I don't have the option to go to somebody else. And that's been the case, say, in the case of social media. look, I am conservative. Maybe even some people would say I'm right wing. I'm certainly a believer in the Word of God. I don't. Some people would probably say I'm fundamentalist. Well, good on them. But you see, the idea of freedom in the economic realm is that we'll always be able to go to somebody else who will want to do that contract with me. So in the case of web design, if somebody says, I don't want to do your web for you because I don't agree with your expression of human sexuality, fine, go and find someone else who will. That's the point I'm making. And that's why it is so important. It's fundamentally important to the effective working of the economic system that we have that freedom. There needs to be a degree of sovereignty on both sides of the deal. This is not a legal issue. I'm talking about what makes the economic system work to deliver human flourishing.
But what
and I consider
protection do we
myself an
have against
expert,
them?
right? I
Yes.
consider myself an expert because I've been
Yes.
in economics for over 40 years.
Yeah. No, and I agree. Like it should be, there should like free commerce, right? Like there really should be an ability to be able to buy, sell to whoever we want to, like, you know, choose, do that. But what's the protection? Like that's the thing. Like we as business owners,
Oh, look, there's not always protection. That's why we have these court cases where someone is sued because they won't provide a product or a service to somebody, and a court then says, well, okay, we don't agree that you should be discriminating on grounds of a person's expression of human sexuality or whatever. But they tend to be the most common. But my view is that of course we should be able to do that. But for the system to work, though, it does depend on you being able to go to find someone else who will contract with you. And that's not always the case where you have what we call monopolies or monopolistic competition, where there's only one or two providers. And that doesn't work well for the economy. It doesn't work well to deliver human flourishing because it allows one or a few large companies to acquire a lot of profit, a lot of wealth over time, and at the same time exploit everybody, their workers, their customers, and so on. So we need a very high degree of what we economists would call competition in an economy, because that actually drives out opportunities to make what we call above normal profits or unreasonable profits. It drives out the opportunity to exploit workers and to exploit customers. But also, by the way, it needs to be underpinned by Christian ethics, a concern for the poor, a determination to use accurate weights and measures, for example. Look, we could spend days and days talking about this. And of course, with some colleagues, I developed a whole undergraduate degree, biblical business. It was a Bachelor of Business in a Christian higher education provider. We developed a whole undergraduate degree and a whole Master of Business Administration program based on these ideas.
So I like that. So I was trying to lean towards what's warnings for us as business owners to avoid this, but you've kind of flipped it on its head. It's like, this isn't actually a warning. This is a rally cry. This is
I guess it is.
Christian business owners, business leaders, step up. Don't play small. Build something big. That's how, like, if we are worried about us being in control or being controlled by these big organizations or having to make, being forced to run our business a certain way, be big enough so that you can be a big player and fight against them and be a good alternative, be a good influence on the industry, be a good influence on your community. Rise up. This is a rally cry to business owners. Take this as a warning, not as a warning to cower back. This is a warning. They're making decisions against business owners. Now, they're in our favor right now, but We need to rise up so we're big enough so that we can be influential in these situations, so that we can be the positive alternative, not be crushed by other monopolies. So, Dr. Rod, I think that's a good place to transition into our next spot, because I think that was there's so much more I'd love to delve into on that topic with you, Dr. Rod. I think we can maybe leave that to another day. I actually do feel like there is a lot to talk about when it comes to, obviously, your missional business that you're big into, as well as all the just commerce itself and how we navigate that place. But we should be free. Well, this is how commerce works. We should have the freedom to be able to supply or purchase from whoever we decide.
Well, Craig, just if I may make one further comment, human freedom is a deeply Christian idea. There is very little human freedom before Christianity came on the scene. That's why Christians have been champions of freedom of speech and freedom of religion, and also a proper separation of state from religion.
Yeah,
we don't want a state religion. We want people to be free to choose, because when all said and done, when Jesus called people to follow him, it was an invitation. It was not a command. Jesus invites us. And fundamentally, freedom of thought, freedom of religion, it's a deeply Christian idea. And it was a radical idea that was brought to the world by the early Christian church.
And you've got really the two sides. You've got the freedom that is offered by Jesus and Christianity, and then you look at the alternative of that, and that is oppression. The devil is just trying to oppress us and enslave us. So yeah, I do like those two contrasts, that Christianity and if you're a leader, let's look at that as the fundamental foundation that you should be aiming for. Is you should be looking at freeing the people under you and offering freedom, not enslaving the people underneath you. Otherwise, you're not Christian. That's just the way it is. So let's transition to the next story, where we're talking about the Southern Baptist Convention, who have now just banned female pastors and ejected a couple of churches as well. There's a lot to talk about here, but what happened is recently, where's the date on this? About 2 weeks ago, this happened, that the Southern Baptist voted, hang on, mute that. Southern Baptist Convention made this vote. Rick Warren stood up to try to argue against it and present his case, because his is one of the churches that is being kicked out because they have female pastors, or actually a female, like apparently their head pastor is whatever title they've got for them. One of their pastors, their main pastors, is a female. And they did this vote, and they've now voted out these people. Now, one of Rick Warren's arguments was the fact that there's many other disagreements that many people in the Southern Baptist Convention disagree on. We brought up one major one about Calvinism, that's one thing that they are that they do differ on opinions of. And I just found it interesting that this is this one small part of female pastors is a thing that's going to divide, or not divide the whole thing. Just two churches are being kicked out, and his being one of them. Now, first question I've got for you, Dr. Rod, is why? why are they so strongly against female pastors? Because one thing that I actually found really interesting is Rick Warren argued, and then the chair of the board or someone of the board or whatever jumped up and presented his case. None of them presented any biblical evidence. None of them actually said, well, in this scripture it says this. And I tried to do a little bit of research. I couldn't really find the evidence as to why they don't agree with female pastors. Why is it?
Oh, where do we start, Craig? I've actually written myself some notes here because I tell you what, this is something that could get us into a bit of trouble. I'd love to talk about this at length. I know that we won't be able to talk for too long, but can I say this? You cannot be a Christian if you don't believe in the virgin birth. Because if Jesus Christ was not actually born of a virgin, at best he could have saved himself. He could not have saved the world, because if he was not born of a virgin, if his two parents were both human beings and not the Holy Spirit, then he would have been born into sin. He would have been born into a state of sin. It would have been impossible for him to become savior of the world. Okay, so he couldn't fulfill his purpose.
Yep.
Second, you cannot be a Christian if you don't believe in the bodily resurrection of Jesus, the most important thing that has ever happened in the whole of human history. Christianity just doesn't work if you don't have both of those as the bases of your faith. Now, beyond that, virtually everything else is up for debate, argument, and disagreement, but it should not tear us apart as sisters and brothers in Christ. Some argue strongly, by the way, and this is explicit in the Athanasian Creed, some argue that you cannot be non-Trinitarian and Christian at the same time. In other words, to be Christian means you must believe in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit as three persons but one substance, as the early church fathers described the Trinity. I'm not quite so strong on that, but I certainly do believe that you've got to accept the virgin birth of Jesus and the bodily, physical resurrection of Jesus. Otherwise, Christianity just falls apart. I'm not so certain about the Trinity, although I'm a very strong believer in the Trinity myself. Now, having said that, issues like the ordination of women and the role of women in the church shouldn't divide us, and they certainly shouldn't divide us as Christians, as brothers and sisters. We're brothers and sisters, we're siblings of Jesus Christ, because God the Father has adopted us into his family. Now, I should also state, from a personal perspective, I'm what they call an egalitarian. I do believe that it's perfectly legitimate for women to be pastors, to teach, including to teach men, to be elders, in other words, to be fully equal with men in expression of our faith in terms of the institutional church and in terms of our activities as ministers outside of our Sunday congregation or Saturday congregation.
So you just used a terminology there, egalitarian. I heard this mentioned a lot, like in some of the videos that.
Yes.
One of the other videos that I've linked below is Ruslan, Ruslan KD. He does some good commentary. I don't agree with all his comments on it, because he actually he argues that he's more of a complementarian.
Yes,
Can you explain, like they were new terms to me?
Yeah, sure.
Can you explain those?
Yep, absolutely. If you hold an egalitarian position on this issue, what you're saying is that there should be no barriers to women in terms of leadership within the context of the institutional church or the activities of the church, as it were, as the body scattered out into the marketplace. There should be no distinction between men and women. That's the position I take, and that's the position that my denomination takes. However,
Yeah.
there are other denominations where their theology is what we call complementarian. What they say, and this is broadly what they say, is that men and women are equal in God's sight. They have equal standing before God. They're equally valued by God. They're equally loved by God. But nevertheless, men and women are different and they complement one another. And what that means is women are not designed or intended by God to take on leadership roles within the context of the church. They're not intended by God to be in a position of pastor or teacher of others, certainly not of men. And many would say that also means they're disqualified. I shouldn't really say disqualified, that they're not intended by God to act in the role of elders on an eldership team or committee within a church.
So let me ask this then. On that base, they say that they're not worthy or
No,
built or
it's
designed,
got nothing to do with worth or value.
That's So
it's basically God's plan at the time of creation was that men and women would be different, and certainly there are some areas in which we're very different. We've got different physical characteristics, for example. We've got different hormonal, chemical makeups. There's a whole range of ways in which men are different in a physiological sense, but also emotionally and psychologically. It's fairly clear that men and women are wired differently by God, and I don't think we can argue about that. Complementarianism would say that also God intended particular, if you like, specialized roles for men and women. In particular, men are the ones who are supposed to lead. They lead in their household, they lead in their church, they lead in their community. That doesn't mean that women are supposed to be inferior or subservient to men. And unfortunately, down through the ages, Christian men have often misinterpreted that theology of complementarianism to mean that women are inferior. Now, if I can point you to the primary biblical verse which is used to justify complementarian, we find it in 1 Timothy chapter 2. And most people quote from verse 11 down to verse 15, or 11 to 14. This is what it says, and I'm reading from the New King James Version for those who care about things like that.
A woman should learn. Give me that verse. Give me that verse again.
It's 1 Timothy chapter 2, and it's verses 11 to 14. It says this: a woman should learn.
Just wait a second, Dr. Rod. I'll get it up on.
No, you're right. Yeah. Okay. Good.
On
so
screen, so we can
read it out loud.
Read it out loud. Yeah. There we go.
Yeah.
Now you say you're doing it from the King James, so let's grab.
No, New King James. New King James.
New King James.
New King James. Yeah. It just gets rid of all the these and thous and that sort of thing.
Okay, so this is Bible Gateway.
Yes,
there we go.
I use Bible Gateway. I paid my subscription. And I recommend it, by the way. It's very good.
There we go. Read it out to us.
Right. It says this. Yours is a little bit different to mine. That doesn't matter.
Okay.
It is. It's interesting. We might have. Anyway. Hang on. Sorry. I've got the New International Version.
Okay, I'll get the NIV
that's
up.
Just an oversight on my part, but it doesn't matter terribly because the difference is not significant.
There we go.
Rightio. Okay. A woman should learn in quietness and in full submission. I do not permit, this is Paul speaking, I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man. She must be quiet. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not the one deceived. It was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner. And then it goes on in verse 15 to say, but women will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with propriety. And that harks back to Genesis chapter 3. Now, a couple of comments I would make here. If you take those verses in isolation, it certainly seems as if it would be wrong to have women in a leadership role, certainly not as pastors in the church setting.
Yep.
But I'm a strong believer in looking at the context of a verse. And in order to get a feel for the context of any verse or group of verses in the Bible, you really need to read around that verse or those verses. Now, I strongly believe that we should read at least verses 8 through to 14 or 15. So we have a look at what's happening just before Paul makes his comment about women learning in quietness and full submission. Says this: therefore, I want the men everywhere to pray, lifting up holy hands without anger or disputing. I also want the women to dress modestly with decency and propriety, adorning themselves not with elaborate hairstyles or gold or pearls or expensive clothes, but with good deeds appropriate for women who profess to worship God. All right. What is Paul saying? He's saying, hey, blokes, don't let your testosterone get the better of you in church, right? Don't have arguments with one another, right? Pray, lift up holy, righteous hands. Get your sin under control. No anger, no disputing. So, the church situation where you're listening to some teaching isn't the place to get involved in loud, raucous, or even physical arguments. Restrain yourselves, men. That's what he's saying. Restrain yourselves. And he's saying to women, and listen, women up until then were never taught anyway, right? Paul, I think, is saying here, listen, women, the outward appearance isn't what matters. The gold, the hairstyle, the clothing, don't focus on that. You've now got the privilege of being able to learn. So he's really just saying, hey, men, you've got a tendency to get involved in arguments. That's just your testosterone. Women, you've got a tendency to want to look good. But really what you want to do, submit and learn. Now, I don't think Paul is saying here that women shouldn't ever be teachers or shouldn't ever be in leadership roles. And I want to explain something more along these lines shortly, if I may.
Yeah.
But I think another important point here is, yes, Adam was formed first. That's fact. That doesn't make him superior to women. No. The reason being, God said in Genesis chapter 2 and verse 18, I think is the key verse here, but he said, it is not good for man to be alone. Now, in the Hebrew, that expression not good is a very, very strong expression. God had just finished observing all of his creation and said it is good, very good, emphatic. And then he says it is not good, also emphatic, for man to be alone. Now, the King James Version refers to the woman, Eve, as the helpmeet, right? Help is Ezer or Ezer, E-Z-E-R in Hebrew. It's used 19 times in the Old Testament. Most of those times it's used in connection with God. It always has the meaning of strong, never inferior, never subordinate. Now, meet, the Hebrew there, it really literally means the opposite or the completer. So literally speaking, when God created Eve, he created a strong completer. Adam was incomplete without Eve. That's what God was saying. So I don't see how the fact that Adam was created before Eve in any way justifies a theology that says women can't be pastors. All right?
Yeah.
Now, I respect my brothers and sisters who have a different view, and they interpret these scriptures in a different way. Adam was not the one deceived. That's also true. Eve was deceived, but Adam deliberately sinned.
Yeah, I was going to jump on that.
See, sin came into the world because of Adam.
Yes.
And the Bible's clear on that. Paul himself is clear on that elsewhere in the epistles. Sin came into the world because of Adam, right? Now, Adam wasn't deceived. He sinned. See, Adam, it was God who told Adam, you can eat of every tree in the garden except this one. He told Adam. He didn't tell Eve. He told Adam. Now, Eve was deceived because she didn't have full knowledge, or she wasn't well enough instructed, if you like, by Adam. But Adam, he made a choice. He made a deliberate choice to knowingly go against God's explicit instruction. And that's why sin entered into the world through Adam. Okay.
So if we're talking about this, like, okay, so he's saying that the women should learn, because up until this point they hadn't had
never had the
to learn,
opportunity.
because he's saying learn.
Remember, women were no better than dogs in that society. In the pre-Christian society, women were no better than dogs.
Yeah.
One of the most radical things that Christianity introduced into human history was the idea that women have standing. They have equal standing with men.
And wasn't it, I mean, very, very soon after, because didn't Paul write about female leaders in the church?
Oh, look, I'll tell you something. One of the most important epistles is the epistle that Paul wrote to the Christians in Rome. Okay. Now listen, we're told in Romans chapter 16 that Paul gave his letter to Phoebe, who was a deacon in the church at, I think you pronounce it Kentria or Kentria. I've heard it pronounced in different ways. First, she was a deacon. Paul had no objection to that. Now, second, the second most important person in terms of circulating a letter in those days was the person who carried it to the intended recipient. Paul entrusted Phoebe with the letter. Now, the way in which things were done back then, didn't have social media, we didn't have Australia Post or, the US Postal Service or anything like that, was carried by a person. Now, the person had more responsibility than simply carrying the letter. They had a greater responsibility than delivering the letter. They had to read it and they had to explain it.
Yes.
Now listen, what Paul was saying to the Romans was pretty radical. They almost certainly had a lot of questions. Who was there to answer those questions on behalf of the writer? Phoebe, a woman, probably a successful businesswoman. Everything points to that fact that she was in business, she was successful in business, she had a significant leadership role in the church, and she was entrusted by Paul not just to deliver the letter, but to read it out aloud and to explain it, to answer questions, in other words. Well, that would have included teaching men. One other thing, if I may, now that I'm up on my soapbox. And this is one of the most significant, apart from the resurrection of Jesus, one of the most significant things that ever happened in human history was that the resurrected Jesus revealed himself to Mary Magdalene and a small group of women. Right? Now, the blokes, they disappeared. They were hiding. They were frightened. They didn't have the courage to appear in public. The women went to the tomb. Now, they were doing women's work. They had intended to do women's work, which is to tend to the body, right? They were going to do that. But they got there, the tomb was empty, and Jesus appeared before them. What did Jesus tell them? He never said, go and get the men. He said, you go to the men and tell them about me.
Teach them.
So the very first people who taught anyone about the resurrected Christ was a bunch of women. Under the law in those days, they couldn't even be witnesses in a court case because they were automatically assumed to be unreliable. You had to have men as witnesses. But Jesus appears to women, and he doesn't say, go and get some of the blokey disciples because I've got something to tell them. He said to them, you go to the disciples and you tell them. And look, isn't our faith largely based on the resurrection? As I say, it's based on the virgin birth of Jesus Christ and the bodily, physical resurrection of Jesus. And the first people who got to tell the story were a group of women. Right now, look, that is significant.
Huge. So before we transition this, I know you've done a lot of preparation. Is there anything more that you want to share?
No, that's all. Well, the only thing I want to share is this. I love my brothers and sisters who think differently, and I would hate ever there to be any cleavage. And look, for full disclosure purposes, my 2 adult married daughters, they attend churches which have a different view. They hold the complementarian view. I don't have that view. I would hate something like this to ever come between me and my family. I never see. One thing we can be certain of: God never intended that an issue like this should divide Christians.
Yeah,
and I think one of the sad things about what we've seen in the Southern Baptist Convention is that this has become a doctrine which has caused division. I think that's very, very sad.
Yeah, so I just want to, I don't want to transition from this topic, but I want to transition within this topic of, okay, I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed being able to delve deep into why I believe that women, or why we believe that women should be equally accepted as leaders. My challenge. Let's talk about this from a leadership perspective, right? Because I suppose this is a little bit of an encouragement to women leaders, but also maybe a lesson for men as well. I want to kind of just delve into this a little bit more about, okay, so if women can't teach men, supposedly, does that mean women can't be leaders in business? Like what is, how does,
I don't, because I don't think so.
Obviously we believe that ministry doesn't end in the four walls of the church. Ministry, business is ministry. Everything we do in life is ministry. And so if we believe that women shouldn't be ministry leaders, we believe that women shouldn't be leaders anywhere, and not that we believe that, but if we were to believe that, and that's why I kind of strongly disagree with that. I mean, I coach a lot of women leaders. Actually, a majority, like I would say, a majority of the people that I lead are actually female leaders, and coach are actually female leaders, which is actually quite interesting. But what would you say to women in leadership positions in and outside of the church?
Lead. Just lead. If you find yourself in a situation where you're not able to, then seriously consider, and do it prayerfully, moving into a situation where you're actually able to lead.
Now, you did say at the start of this, and we agree, that there are physiological differences between men and women.
Yes, there are.
You spoke about hormones, you spoke about all personalities, everything like that. Not personalities, because personalities are different within genders as well as between. But if we're to look at that view, how does that make a female leader different from a male leader?
That is a good question. And I do think that female leaders tend to operate differently to male. Not all. You can't put everybody in the same basket. And without being pejorative about it, I would say that men tend, it's a general tendency, to be a bit more focused on getting a task done. And women tend to have the ability or a stronger focus on the way people are going to feel about things.
Yes.
Now, that's a sense in which I think men and women are complementary. And my own personal experience in leadership is that it's worked best for me when I've been surrounded by a group of people that includes both men and women.
Yes.
We get different perspectives, and I sincerely believe that we get better outcomes. Yeah. Look, I'm quite focused on task. I want to get things done. I want to tick things off because I sleep better that way. And sometimes I can, I guess, underemphasize the importance of truly loving my neighbor
Yes.
in those contexts. And I've found that women are able to bring a perspective to the table which modifies my tendency to want to get a task done and then to move on.
Yes.
So we are complementary in many ways, but I don't think that rules out women in leadership roles. But what I would say to women who are in leadership roles, if you're a CEO or if you own your business, surround yourself by a leadership group and perhaps mentors as well, who from both sexes, who are both male and female. I do believe at the end of the day, there's more wisdom, there are better decisions, and I base this primarily on my personal experience, but also my theological understanding. It just works better when you have both men and women in leadership positions. And in terms of the top dog, the CEO or the chair of the board, I don't think it matters all that much whether they're a male or a female, but they must surround themselves in that senior leadership group or on a board of directors by both men and women.
Yeah, that's good. And I think it just goes back to that original thing that I mentioned before is we're one body, many parts. We all
Yes, yeah,
bring something unique to the table, not just men and women, but each individually. We each individually bring something unique to the table, whether you're male, female, whether you're eccentric or whether you're outgoing or not, or like whatever personality you have, or whatever, however you are positioned, whatever skill sets you have something amazing to contribute, but none of us can do it alone. We all together, and we can't all be in a room with all people exactly like us, otherwise we'd all kill each other. And that's why we should have a variety. And it's no good for any organization, whatever we're leading, whether it be a church, whether it be a business, whether it be a small business or a corporation, or a community group, or whatever that we're leading. Whatever we're leading, it will only benefit from a variety of input, from a variety of perspectives, from a variety of skill sets and personalities. We need to find people around us that complement us, that we shouldn't lead in isolation. We should lead in collaboration with others. So, Dr. Rod, going to our end bit where we've already done a bit of a Bible study today, which I thought was really, really great. So thank you very much for leading us to that. But let's end off with our leadership lessons from Luke. Coming up with this week. So I thought of that last topic of Southern Baptist Convention voting out Rick Warren and his church, and some other churches that have female pastors, and female pastors now being voted out, and everything like that. And I thought of maybe let's talk about rejection. Like let's go. What does the Bible talk about? Especially Luke, going through Luke. What does it talk about rejection? And one passage jumped out at me was Luke 4:14 and onwards. Jesus rejected at Nazareth. Obviously, it talks about he was coming from his temptation in the desert, in the wilderness. He then came back to Nazareth. He opened up the scroll and did the famous read from Isaiah. Now, actually, I find that quite interesting that he opened the scroll and read it. Like, I'm sure he knew that off by heart, and he knew what he was going to say. I'm surprised that it says that he read it from the Bible. How he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recover the sight for the blind, to release oppressed, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." I'm going to stop just there for a moment. There's a little bit more, but this is kind of a side note, that in here, he's just come from a battle. He's come from the temptation, from the 3 temptations of the devil in the wilderness. And he's come from a battle, and now he's about to be rejected by his community, his family, like the people he grew up with. He's now about to be rejected by them. And I think that one big lesson that I have to take from this is he reads out this scripture, but he's talking about, this is what I've been anointed for. This is what I've been called for. This is my purpose. This is my calling. I know this is what God has put me on this earth to do. And so I find it really reassuring that if you find yourself in this place where we've spoken about, today about courts being for or against certain organizations, certain decisions, the Southern Baptist Convention voting out women pastors and being against, like we will face opposition. We will have people that won't like us, that won't agree with us, that will reject us. How do we handle it? Well, Jesus just sits there and states his purpose. He reminds, I kind of like to think of it like he kind of reminds himself, this is what I'm here for. I'm here because God has anointed me. I may be under certain pressures or temptations or rejection or whatever, but I have been anointed. The Spirit of the Lord is on me. And then he states out what he was there for. So that's as a little bit of a side note. But then he goes back and then talks about the fact that people reject him, and I won't read through the whole thing, but talking about that. One of the big challenges, Dr. Rod, and we talk about, he says this statement that, where is it? What verse is it? That a prophet in his own home is not honored. There we go. In verse 24, I tell you the truth, he continued, no prophet is accepted in his hometown. Now, I know as a leader, I've quite often found that as well. Dealing with my family, they're the hardest people for me to lead or influence because I'm just the kid that they used to spank when I was being naughty as a kid or whatever. Or I find it much harder to be a leader and an influencer in my hometown. Why is that, and how can we overcome that, Dr. Rod?
I suppose partly it's because people know us, or at least they think they know us. And this is especially the case if people have known us before we've actually become a Christian. Yep. And I remember the reaction of some people to me, not family, but people I knew, was, you're just a hypocrite because I wasn't doing stuff I used to do. I remember, this particular person used a swear word as well. But what she was saying was, man, you don't know how big a hypocrite you are. So that's part of it. People have seen us growing up or they've seen how we behave before we have the transformational experience of becoming a Christian. And they do see that and obviously they think, well, that's pretty hypocritical because you used to do this and now you're against it all. So that's one thing.
But shouldn't that just be more evidence to support? Because yes, you're talking about Christianity, but let's just even say with leadership, right? That a lot of people that I know growing up with, that they've seen me through my experiences. They've seen all the little things that I've done. Wouldn't you think that they would see, oh yeah, I've seen his journey. I've seen how he did that little thing and did that little thing. Shouldn't they? But they don't.
No, I think we have a tendency to judge people today based on what they were like in the past. We tend to do that with everything, by the way. When we're looking at data, we always look at the past and we just extrapolate that into the future. And I think we do exactly the same when we're making judgments about family members and friends. Well, it used to be like this, so in all likelihood, they're going to be like this in the future. So if at the moment I'm disavowing certain behaviours and criticising things I used to do, then what makes me a hypocrite is that I'm going to revert.
Mm.
Because we tend to have this tendency of saying, well, whatever you did in the past, that is the best indicator of what you'll do in the future. And I guess for a lot of people it is. And as I said, statisticians do it all the time. We take the data about the past and then we extrapolate it into the future, perhaps because we've got no better way. But I think the other thing with Jesus is that this was the launch of his public ministry.
Mm.
It's significant that he was in the synagogue. Now, you don't just walk into a synagogue, open the scroll and read from it. You've got to be invited. And you'll never get invited unless you've already got standing. So we know that from 12 years of age, he grew in wisdom, understanding, and in stature amongst the Jews. So he had enough stature to actually be invited into the synagogue and to read from the scroll. And yeah, I agree with you. He would have known. He was God, remember? He wrote it all in the first place. So he knew it was there. But it was the way in which things were done. And it's still done in the synagogues today. They read from the scroll. I've actually seen one of those scrolls. It's in a huge silver cylinder, which stands probably 1.5 meters high, perhaps. It's a substantial and very valuable document. So he would have read from that scroll. But you see, what he was actually doing, though, and this was what launched his public ministry. He was saying, "I am the Messiah."
Mm.
The scriptures that he referred to are messianic in nature, but we've got to keep remembering that a lot of the Jews did not accept that he was the Messiah. Now, it would have been blasphemous for him to say it outright. Okay, so it would have been unwise, at the very least, perhaps even stupid, for him to stand up in the synagogue on that day and say, "Listen, all these scriptures point to the Messiah. I'm the Messiah. You know, come follow me." That just wouldn't have worked. So he read out these scriptures, quoting from Isaiah chapter 61 and 58. I think there might be some scraps of other Old Testament scriptures in there as well. But see, then he says this in verse 21, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." Now, he was really saying, you know what? I am the guy. I'm the Messiah.
Yeah.
Now, that offended a lot of Jews, particularly those who were in the upper class, because Jesus as Messiah, at the very least, was inconvenient for them.
Yep.
Because of the way they were.
If a Messiah came,
he was going to.
If a Messiah came in the way that they thought a Messiah was going to come to overthrow the king and everything like that,
well,
they would no longer have their standing.
Well, they believed that their Messiah was going to free them from Roman rule and all these sorts of things.
Yeah.
And clearly this Jesus joker wasn't going to do that right from the start. He never showed any tendencies to want to revolt against the Romans, but he grew in stature. He was clearly recognized as someone having great wisdom. He was called rabbi, perhaps not then, but later in his life. And back then, rabbi wasn't a position. It was just a name that was given to somebody who was recognized as a teacher. So you didn't necessarily have to have any kind of formal education. I know some people say that, between him being lost by his parents and found at the temple when he was maybe 12 or 13 years of age, and then launching into his public ministry, that he was actually being trained as a rabbi. There's not actually any biblical evidence that happened, and it wasn't necessary for someone to be called rabbi, but he was clearly esteemed, recognized as someone who was a good teacher. Then he stands up and reads from those Old Testament scriptures, and when he says, "This has been fulfilled today in your hearing," they would have understood that he was actually making a claim to be the Messiah.
Yeah.
Now, he didn't say it in words, so he couldn't be accused of blasphemy, which was a capital offence. But he made enemies.
Mm.
And at least some of them decided, well, we've got to get rid of the guy, so they were going to stone him or whatever, throw him over a cliff. But he doesn't speak out because it wasn't his time. And of course, what does he do? Miraculously, he walked right through the crowd and went on his way. And obviously, he did a lot more public ministry and generated a lot of support. This is getting off the topic a little bit, but I don't believe that the crowd who were crying out rapturously on on his walk into Jerusalem, or what we call Palm Sunday, wasn't the same crowd who cried out, "We want Barabbas." That was a renter crowd.
Yeah.
Though that particular crowd was put together politically for political purposes by the leaders of the day, because they were the ones who stood to lose by acknowledgement that Jesus was the Messiah and that he was ushering in this upside down kingdom. Based on love of God and love for neighbour, not based on revolt against the Roman powers. So, yeah, I mean, even his half brother James didn't believe he was the Messiah until after the resurrection, and James ultimately became one of the early Christian church leaders. But I mean, he couldn't even convince his own family
Yeah.
that he was who he said he was.
Yeah.
I mean, his mother, I think, was different, but we know that James didn't believe he was who he said he was.
And Joseph would have always had doubts. It's like, sure, I don't know. This baby that just turned up, who knows?
Oh, no, he wouldn't have. No, because he had a visitation by an angel. He knew what was going on.
That's right.
And it was a big risk for him not to divorce Mary. See, divorce was something that happened during the period of betrothal. So normally someone was betrothed, there'd be a ceremony, then she would go back to her parents' house, he would go back to his parents' house, they'd be separated for about a year. That was pretty normal. And see, that year would generally, there would be evidence during that year if the woman had sex with another man, right? And that was grounds for divorce, but that happened before the marriage ceremony. Joseph knew that the Holy Spirit was the father of Jesus because he had a visitation by an angel, and we know he's a righteous man, and because he was a righteous man and obviously I think a man of faith, he determined in his heart that he wasn't going to quietly divorce her, and that he was actually going to go through and follow through on God's will. Yeah, so I know there's a lot of speculation about Joseph, but look, he was in on it. I don't think it was the birth of Jesus wasn't a surprise to him. And there were other instances too where he had a dream where God spoke to him and said, "Take the child down to Egypt." They lived in Egypt for a while to keep him safe. So it's a funny thing. We don't hear much about Joseph after the birth of Jesus, really. So yeah, that's something I'm going to find out when I get to heaven.
So Jesus rejected by the community, literally driven out by the community. Now he just went about his way, went on to the next town, did his thing, did miracles and healings and all that sort of stuff. So what's your advice for leaders that are being rejected? For example, these female pastors that are being rejected by the Southern Baptist Convention, or any other leaders that are being rejected. What's your advice to them?
Know your purpose. Jesus knew his purpose, right? He basically, when he was reading from those Old Testament scriptures, he was really saying, the reason I am here is to usher in a permanent jubilee.
Yeah.
The prisoners set free. Now, he didn't mean that people who were imprisoned by the Romans or whatever would necessarily be set free. He was talking about something on the inside. He was talking about a massive revolution on the inside. He knew his purpose. As a leader, you need to know your purpose and stay true to your purpose. That is what will give you the strength to deal with the opposition. Now, hopefully, people are not going to kill you because of the purpose that God has given you. But for some, in some regimes, guess what? That's a distinct possibility.
Yeah.
But if I can give you any comfort there, you're just going to get to be with Jesus a bit sooner than the rest of us.
Yes, exactly.
But it might
No,
not be much fun going through the valley of the shadow of death, that's for sure.
yeah.
But and Craig, you often emphasize how important it is to know your purpose. As a leader, it's essential. We're just not going to be strong enough to survive the opposition, if not from other people, the opposition from the devil, if we don't know what our purpose is. And if you are watching this podcast and you're not, and I know a lot of people are not sure, that's okay. Keep living your life as best you can according to the standards you find in the Bible. Pray and let Craig have some input in your life, because this guy can help you define your purpose. And I say that with all sincerity.
Free
Yes,
program
go on,
below
have a
to
look
help
down
you
there.
discover your purpose. That's the foundation of our leadership development program. That is all free. Link into the description for you to check out. That is another shameless plug for
But
us.
of course, just by way of background, you know this, Craig, but perhaps many of our listeners and watchers won't know this. But one of the reasons why I agreed to do this podcast was because I watched your leadership program, and I think is it the first 6 or 8 sessions are all about defining your purpose. It's really very, very important.
Yeah. Foundational. So
Absolutely.
to back up what Dr. Rose says, like if you are being rejected, if you feel like the world is rejecting you, if you feel like the world is against you and rejecting you and against you or whatever, and you're feeling challenged as a leader, make sure you remember your purpose, but take it one step forward. Pursue your purpose. Remember your purpose, like Jesus did in the scripture. He's like, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because I've been anointed to do X, Y, and Z. He knew his purpose. And then what did he do? The crowd were against him, and he just walked through them and went on to the next town and continued his purpose. So it's not just about knowing your purpose. Yes, that gives us the strength, the courage to be able to push through, to drag ourselves out of bed when everything seems to be going wrong or everything seems to be against us. Yes, but once you know your purpose, you need to then go and pursue your purpose every day. You still don't know your purpose. That's okay. Continue to seek your purpose. I believe that knowing your purpose, there's never a complete knowing of your purpose. That's what I believe. I don't believe that, I've got it all, I've got it now, and that's it. No, I believe our life should be a continual journey of seeking and pursuing God to continue to discover more and more revelation, a larger revelation, a bigger picture of what our purpose is. And as we said before, shameless plug, link in description if you want to go and discover your purpose. There's the free leadership development program there. The first 10 weeks are actually created for developing your purpose or discovering your purpose. And then the rest of the program is all based on then discovering, seeing how you apply your purpose to your leadership. Dr. Rod, we have actually covered it. We've actually done a long session. We haven't done a 2-hour podcast for a while. We've actually been quite well behaved. However, today, some massive topics. Well, obviously, we spoke about Trump. That was a quick one, but affirmative action admissions in universities. I really loved your take on that. The courts saving Christian businesses, the Southern Baptist Convention voting out female pastors, and Jesus being rejected at Nazareth. Dr. Rod, once again, so grateful for your wisdom sharing with us again this week. Thank you for sharing your time.
You're so welcome, Craig, and I really do value this opportunity to be with you as well.
Awesome. Well, and for you watching, thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to listen to us. I hope you've learned something from it. If you have, give it a thumbs up. Put a comment below. We'd love to hear how this has impacted your perspective, or maybe how it's impacted your leadership. And hey, if you want to learn more about this, we do this every week, and we cut this up into short little segments for you to watch as well. So consider giving our channel sub as well. So thank you. Appreciate you, Dr. Rod, Yash in the background, clicking all our buttons for you watching. We appreciate you, and have an absolutely blessed week. And make sure you learn, live, and lead on purpose.